I think the last murder in the village of Armada was in 1973. A young couple were on the trail and they came across a dog that was very upset. And it was moving back and forth, trying to investigate what's wrong with the dog. The gentleman looks into the woods and he observes a lifeless body.
911?
Upstairs, we just found a body on the mountainside trail.
Is it a male or a female?
Female.
About how old do you think she is?
I didn't get that close.
The young lady didn't appear to be a full teenager.
Imagine being violated and left to rot in a body bag. That's what happened to 14-year-old April Millsap. April Millsap was out on a beautiful stroll with her dog Penny when she suddenly had an uneasy feeling something was wrong. She had had an encounter with a stranger and something felt off. She immediately sent her boyfriend a casual text about it. "I think I almost got kidnapped." But little did she know there was something worse coming her way. Let's explore the case of the girl who was violated and left in a body bag. On July 24th, 2014, April Millsap woke up and thought it was a good day. She had the whole day ahead of her. She had just finished middle school and was about to start high school in the fall of 2014. April loved her dog, Penny, and loved spending time with her. And since she had a lot of time on her hands that day, she decided to take Penny on a leisurely stroll through her neighborhood. April had taken Penny out for a walk many times before. So even though it was late in the evening, she thought nothing of taking her dog on a walk at that time because they lived in a small, relatively safe area, or so she thought. Armada, Michigan is a small farming community about an hour north of Detroit. But unlike Detroit's big city problems and crime, Armada was a safe area where everyone knew each other. Armada's entire population was a little more than 1,700 people. Everywhere you turned, you met someone you knew. There was always a warm, smiling face waiting to greet you. It was not a community that knew fear or danger. In fact, it was so safe that the police department only had 2 full-time police officers on staff.
There are only 2 full-time police officers. There are 10 part-time police officers.
In a town where everyone knew each other, crime was very low. Even if you did commit a crime, chances are someone will recognize you and you won't get away with it. But everyone loves each other in Armada, so no one wanted to hurt anyone. People in Armada didn't even lock their doors at night before July 24th, 2014. That's how safe they felt. But life in Armada changed the day that 14-year-old April Millsap took her dog for a walk at her usual trail on that warm summer evening.
You know, you live in a small town because that's the kind of life you want to live. You think it's safe there, but it really isn't.
April left home at around 6 p.m., but a few hours later, she still hadn't come back home, nor did she call her mom or send a text. Or did she? Her mom, Jennifer Millsap, was immediately worried. April had never just gone out for that long without calling. She knew in her heart something was wrong. She sent April a text message asking where she was, but April didn't respond. She sends her another message, and that went unanswered as well. Something akin to fear was beginning to settle deep in her soul, but she didn't want to believe it. Jennifer sent April 2 more texts, both of which were unanswered. At this point, it was hard to believe the feeling of dread crawling up her spine. Something was definitely wrong. Jennifer decides to call April, and what came after chilled Jennifer to her bones.
The person you are trying to reach is not accepting calls at this time. Please try your call again later.
When Jennifer's call to April went straight to voicemail, she knew she had to do something. So she called April's boyfriend, and that call unraveled something that began what would be a horrific summer for the Millsaps. When Jennifer called April's boyfriend, he told her that he had been hanging out with his friends and hadn't heard from April. Or had he? He would later discover that April had sent him a chilling text hours earlier saying, "I think I almost got kidnapped." He didn't get the text until hours later, and it would be the last time anyone heard from April ever again. April's mom, Jennifer, places a frantic call to the police, informing them that her daughter is missing. The small town with only 2 full-time police officers on staff was now plunged into a missing persons case that only a few hours later would turn into a murder case. While the police threw everything they had into finding April, the whole time, Penny never left April's side. A young couple was walking on the trail at around 8:20 p.m. when they suddenly came across a frantic dog. The dog was obviously very upset, but when they looked around, there was no one there with him. Penny came towards them and they thought she was going to attack them. But when he didn't, they tried to calm her down, but she started walking forward. Then Penny walked to a drainage ditch and then back to the couple as if she wanted them to follow her. They followed her, and that's when they came across the body of April Millsap. April's body was partially naked with her shorts and underwear pulled down to her ankle. The couple immediately called 911 to report the horrific scene they had just come across.
We just found a body along the mountain bike trail.
Is it a male or a female?
Female.
About how old do you think she is?
I didn't get that close.
Okay. Is she on the trail?
No, she's off of the trail, touched back in the woods, her clothes are all taken off.
The news that a body had been found in the woods spread like wildfire in the small-knit community. Friends were texting friends to make sure that they were okay. Families were checking in on each other to make sure they weren't the victim. Most people responded to the texts, except April. When April's mother heard the news, she was immediately terrified. Her daughter is already missing, and though she dreaded the thought that it could be her little girl laying naked in the woods, she still summoned the strength to go to the crime scene with April's boyfriend. When she reached the crime scene, what she found shattered her heart. At the crime scene, she informed the police that her daughter was missing. The police asked Jennifer what her daughter was doing when she went missing, and Jennifer revealed that she had been out walking her dog. Then she went ahead to describe the dog to the police, and what she described was identical to the dog the couple found on the trail. With each description Jennifer gave the police, she had a sinking realization that April was the one found in the woods.
They described the clothes that April was wearing. That's the clothes our victim had on.
And when it was revealed to Jennifer that it was indeed April, Jennifer couldn't feel anything.
When I found out, I'm kind of numb.
Is there an anger within you, or is it just pain?
Mostly pain, but yeah, there's anger. So why this happened to me, and I try not to blame God for it, but yeah, why? It's why is the biggest question. Why?
Although Jennifer felt the pain personally, the entire community was also in pain. They all knew and loved April, and they could not believe that one of them could do something so terrible to a girl they'd seen growing up.
I remember when April was a little girl walking over to the bus stop. You know these people, you know everybody in town.
Who could have done this to April? Who would attack and murder a 14-year-old girl in such a brutal way? The answer was about to tear this community apart. Armada was heartbroken. They had gone from a safe place where people hardly locked their doors to a place where people were terrified and constantly looking over their shoulders. No one trusted anyone anymore, and they couldn't feel safe in their once safe homes. And there was a killer on the loose. There hadn't been a murder in 41 years. The small police department in Armada did not have the resources for this savage crime, so they called in reinforcements. Armada called in the FBI and Michigan State Police to help their small police department catch April's killer. The whole town chipped in where they could, and most importantly, they provided support to April's mom, Jennifer. Jennifer Millsap had a neurological imbalance that affected her speech and balance, but she did everything she could to raise April, mostly on her own. Then she met David Lechenfeld when April was 7 years old, and they became a small little blended family. That is, until April was torn from them, and all Jennifer had left of her was the school picture she took just before she died. So what exactly happened to April on the day she was murdered? The police didn't have a lot to go on. They hadn't found any ID on her, and they also immediately noticed that her phone was missing. While the police searched through for some evidence, Penny was taken to a local animal shelter to be checked for any DNA evidence. The police were hoping Penny attacked April's killer and might have his DNA on her. When there wasn't any DNA evidence found on Penny, the police decided to try a different approach. They released April's photo to the press, confirming that she was the one found in the woods. The police accompanied their press release with a plea, begging anyone who knew anything to come forward. And finally, they caught a break in April's case.
We have witnesses that identify April, put her there with the man on the motorcycle.
The police received an incredible amount of calls from concerned residents who had seen something, but a few stood out, mostly because they had been about the same person. The police got their first tip from a man and his 2 daughters who had been on the trail at the exact same time April had been there with Penny. They had seen April talking to a strange man, and they knew that for sure because the man's 2 kids were April's schoolmates, so they knew who she was.
We got a huge tip from a father and 2 of his daughters who had seen April on the path that evening.
The 2 daughters went to school with April. They know who she is. And April is talking to an older man on a blue and white motorcycle, and he's wearing a black helmet.
The man also chips in a few details that would eventually help the police nail April's killer.
The father described the motorcycle as an off-road enduro, blue and white motorbike.
With this eyewitness account, the police already have an idea of what they think happened to April, but this next tip made it all the more true.
It was a mother-daughter combination that was riding their bike on the path on the day the murder occurred and called in to tell us they saw a male with a motorcycle, moped-style bike talking to a young female who was walking her dog.
But that wasn't all.
They went and did their loop and turned back around. By the time they came back, the young girl and the dog were no longer there, and all they saw was the motorcycle parked on the path. And one of the witnesses looked to the side in the woods and saw the man was standing there, looking at her, shocked as if he had been caught doing something wrong.
The mother and her daughter were so freaked out by the look in the man's eyes that they just kept walking. But the question on everyone's mind is, did they walk in on the man as he was murdering April Millsap? Could April's life have been saved? Unfortunately, we'll never know. The next day, when the police released April's picture during their media report, the mother and daughter knew for a fact that they had seen that man do something evil. They called the police to give an account of what they had seen. The police had a strong feeling that the man on the motorcycle was the killer, so they brought in a sketch artist to meet with the woman who was sure she had seen his eyes.
When I saw this sketch, I thought, this is our guy. Who is he, and can he be matched to somebody that's out there?
After those tips, the police finally started to piece together what could have happened to April. According to the police, it was likely that April had been approached by the man on the trail while she was walking her dog. He came onto her, she rejected him, and turned away. She likely immediately sent the "I think I almost just got kidnapped" text to her boyfriend right there. Based on the time that she sent that text, the police used the GPS on her phone to figure out exactly where she was on the trail. But they would find one more thing that would draw out April's very last steps for them.
There was a fitness app running on April's phone.
April's fitness tracking app would provide the police with a digital trail that would lead the police to her killer. With the help of the fitness tracker, the police were able to recreate April's last steps, and they noticed she changed direction and started walking at a much faster pace after she sent that text.
She was walking away from the assailant when she sent that text.
When April texted her boyfriend to let him know that she had almost been kidnapped, she probably thought she was safe. She never saw her killer coming up behind her. The fitness tracker allowed the police to figure out that April struggled to fight off her killer. She probably tried to fight him off when he hit her over the head with his motorcycle helmet, dragged her into the woods, ripped off her clothes, and tried to violate her. But that's not all he did. In a fit of rage after April rejected him, he stomped on her head and neck so hard that he crushed her windpipe and left a visible shoe print on the side of her face.
He stomps her so viciously that the shoe impressions are vivid.
April's fitness app allowed the police to track exactly how long she struggled to fight off her attacker before he hit her on the head.
For about 15 minutes, there is a scuffle. You can see the phone going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and then the phone leaves the crime scene at a speed of 13 miles an hour. So we know that it's on a motorized vehicle.
The killer took off with April's backpack with her cell phone in it, probably with the intention of dumping it somewhere far away to lead any investigation away from him. What he didn't know was that he had a digital tracker with him that tracked his every move and led the investigation right to him. The police followed the digital trail and found April's cell phone the very next day. And call it luck or the gift of a small town, but the police caught another break in April's murder case.
At one point later in the day, I grabbed some lunch with my mom, who lives right outside of the town of Armada. And on my way back to the command center, I spotted a motorcycle down in a driveway parked next to a garage.
A policeman who had gone to visit his mom right outside Armada spotted a motorcycle that looked very much like the one described by the witnesses. But could it be the very same one?
So I turned around, pulled in the driveway, took a few photos of it, and took that back to the command center.
Then the police officer got to the police station. His colleagues took one look at it and immediately they knew there was more to the story. They inputted the information plate number in the photo into their database. And that is how April's trail led the police and FBI to James Van Kalis. 32-year-old James Van Kalis lived with his father 15 miles outside Armada in a town called Goodells. His father was also named James Van Kalis. James Van Kalis Jr. and James Van Kalis Sr. both had prior arrests on their record. James Van Kalis Sr. was a registered sex offender who had been convicted for statutory of a minor under 13 years old. But the police knew they weren't looking for James Van Kalis Sr. When the police compared the driver's license photo of James Van Kalis Jr. on their database to the composite sketch that they had, it looked like the same person.
We pulled up his driver's license photo and compared it to the sketch we had. And it was uncanny. It looked just like the sketch.
So they turned their sights to James Van Kalis Jr., who also had a prior arrest for breaking and entering. The policeman went back to the house and questioned James Van Kalis.
James answered the questions I asked. He told me that he was in Armada the night before on his motorcycle, that he had stopped at a gas station for a minute, but that he was on his way through Armada to go visit his brother at his brother's house.
According to James, he left home around 5:30 p.m. and arrived at his brother's house around 6 p.m. and stayed there until 7 p.m. So, according to James Van Kalis's timeline, he was already at his brother's house by the time April was murdered.
Did admit that he owns a black helmet. He told me he was wearing a pair of K-Swiss and went in the house willingly to retrieve them.
James Van Kalis lied to the police about the shoes he was wearing that night, but he wouldn't get away with it for long.
Eventually, a female came out as well, later identified as James' girlfriend. She was reinforcing what James was telling me that he was wearing, including these shoes at that time.
The police now had a couple of things against James Van Kalis, enough for a search warrant. He looked like the sketch, he had a blue motorcycle exactly like the one the witness saw at the crime scene, but what really brought it home was that he lied about the time he got to his brother's house. The police found video evidence that he was still in Armada at around 6:51 p.m. But when they went to execute the search warrant on his house, James Van Kalis said something that threw the police for a loop.
James made a comment at the first search warrant that everything he learned from his father. And his father nodded and acknowledged that that was the truth.
It was beginning to look like a case of like father, like son. The police raided the Van Kalis home and found something that allowed them to make an arrest.
Once we got into the home, we realized that he had a marijuana grow operation in the backyard. So we arrested him.
The police held James Van Kalis until they figured out what else they had found in his home. But as James Van Kalis sat in jail, an unexpected witness stepped forward with a bombshell revelation that turned the case around.
I specifically remember James tell the officers that he was wearing K-Swiss shoes that night. James was not wearing K-Swisses at the time. He had on his Air Nikes.
James's girlfriend, who had corroborated James's earlier statement that he had been wearing K-Swiss shoes, was now recanting. She knew she shouldn't have lied to the police, but she was scared that if she had told the truth, something would have happened to her. But The moment the police took James away, she was free to tell the truth, knowing he couldn't hurt her from jail. Not only did she recant her earlier statement, she revealed something that handed the police their smoking gun.
I woke up in the middle of the night and James was cleaning his shoes with a sock. He had hand sanitizer sitting next to him, and he told me he was cleaning oil off his shoes. The next morning, I noticed the shoes were gone.
Though the shoes were nowhere to be found, the police searched through his social media, and lo and behold, there was James wearing a pair of Air Nikes.
We found a picture of James wearing the specific black tennis shoes. And we ended up buying an identical pair to compare with the tread marks we had on April's face. It was that same herringbone pattern.
The police also went through his phone records and found out that he was around the trail at the time of April's murder. Plus, his internet history in the months leading up to the fateful day showed he'd looked up things like how to attract young girls, how to make a girl fall in love with you, what girls really want, and why does this girl ignore me? The police knew they had found their killer. James Van Kalis was charged with the murder of April Millsap, felony murder, kidnapping, and the attempted rape of April Millsap. On January 21st, 2016, a year and a half after April Millsap was brutally murdered, the trial of James Van Kalis began. Van Kalis maintained his innocence throughout the trial, and his defense attorney argued that the lack of physical evidence connecting Van Kalis to the murder with which he had been charged.
DNA prints?
Prints, no.
Hair?
No.
Fiber?
No.
As the prosecution presents their case in court, the weight of their case lied heavily on the testimony of one person, James Van Kalis's ex-girlfriend, Crystal Stadler.
Had you ever seen him clean his shoes before?
No.
Does he say anything to you when he comes back to bed?
Yeah, that he messed up and he needed me to stand by his side.
Crystal's testimony tied all the circumstantial evidence the police had together. Her testimony brought everything together: his helmet, shoes, and bike. The trial went on for 2.5 weeks, and then the jury reached a verdict.
Count 1, first degree premeditated murder. We find the defendant guilty. Count 2, first degree felony murder, guilty.
The jury felt so strongly about the case that they attended the sentencing, and Jennifer's mother got her day in court and gave a gut-wrenching impact statement. What did April ever do to you for you to be so brutal with her? Why did you have to hurt her? Just because she ignored your advances, she deserved to die? What made you so darn special?
Did she deserve to die? My life will never be the same. I pity you. And I hate you, and I can never forgive you.
James Van Kalis also had his moment to speak, and he maintained his innocence as he'd always done. But the judge did not care.
The reality is we're here to sentence you. Anything you want to say regarding an appeal, you can do that as soon as you're done with me.
April Millsap's mother knows James Van Kalis' sentencing cannot bring her daughter back, but she can rest easy knowing that her daughter got justice, and most importantly, James Van Kalis will be spending the rest of his life in prison, and that meant he couldn't do what he did to April to any other little girl. Hey, thanks for watching. What do you think about April Millsap's case? Do you know of other horrific murder stories? Let me know in the comment section. And before you go, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that bell button. See you next time.